Individual awareness of unique ideas, recollections, emotions, sensations, and surroundings is referred to as consciousness. This sense of self-awareness is distinctive for any human being. If one can relate a word to something else that he is experiencing, it's a dimension of his inner consciousness. Ancient Hindu discoveries regarding the 4 states of consciousness are described in the Mandukya Upanishad. It identifies these states as awakening, dreaming, sleeping cycle, and lastly, the state of enlightenment. Consciousness is the consequence of neuronal systems in the brain. The encoding of neuronal group discharge patterns, coupling of these depictions into semantic references, and rivalry among these semantic pointers are all crucial procedures concerning consciousness. It's how individuals perceive the physical and metaphysical activities going on around them, the flavors they feel when they eat, the colors they enjoy while observing the dusk, the affectionate touch of an adorable person, the fragrance of an autumn morning, and loads of music reverberating in the air. Consciousness is the human condition of awareness, but where does it originate from? Users are behind and beyond it if they can perceive consciousness. Therefore, consciousness must have grounding. The logic must be unveiled. Initially, a mental image mimics an item that one perceives with his 5 senses. That is precisely what the consciousness of the 5 senses accomplishes for a human being. They provide individuals with both these tagless and signless images that emerge in human consciousness. Following that, awareness encompasses those images and converts them into meaningful, specific elements to be viewed with unique features and attributes. Otherwise, everything would appear to be identical to every other material, and every sense sector would appear to be equivalent to every other sensitive area. This is accomplished by a segment of awareness known as the mind. It assigns objects identification and properties. It mostly functions in naming and labeling. Then there's the perceiving portion of awareness, referred to as assumed quiet self, and mentioned as the appearing knower. It is the self-reflexive learner, the wellspring of rationalization, and the axis around which people analyze and understand things. The self, or knower, is the self-judgment part of consciousness. The knower is the one who is aware of the thought processes. There is consciousness when there is a thought. But what is there when consciousness is unoccupied? Humans are not obliterated or non-existent since the world continues to exist. One may believe there is a void in consciousness, yet it always resurfaces. Whatever people want to call it, there will always be a consistency of consciousness behind, above, beyond that trespasses consciousness. When consciousness is devoid of any substance, it is the awareness that prevails. This awareness can be referred to as ready awareness, primordial awareness, opportunity for consciousness, or participation, which are all synonyms for mental existence, without the thoughts of infringing such identity. These 3 components, such as mirrored images of perception, descriptive picking up of discrimination and remembering, must combine the same supporting substance to connect. Otherwise, they would not be able to access the surrounding activities. Therefore, they are all eventually portions or functions of a similar consciousness. All 3 are the same concept, but they are discussed in 3 stages because of the distinct features. However, they must be joined as one, otherwise they will be unable to engage with one another. The 7th awareness, or self-authenticating nature, needs something exceptional. It is something that validates it, something that transcends it. Then there must be something that sits beyond the inner human core-centric element. There is something beneath knowingness in technical jargon that certifies the apparent inner self. Knowingness cannot crop up unless there is something behind it. There has to be some substance that causes consciousness to arise. Also, there has to be something before consciousness, understanding, that affirms this contention. Corroboration implies assisting in the emergence of consciousness. Isn't it true that consciousness doesn't appear on its own? If it did, inanimate objects would feel their existence. Consciousness, or knowingness, occurs in response to circumstances. However, there is something responsible as a persistent substratum before or between those conditions. What is the substratum that accepts the outcomes of consciousness as proof of its authenticity? What exactly is it that lies beneath knowingness? The knowingness perspective of consciousness is already present when people wake up in the morning, and before the diverse ideas envelop their mind and soul. There is a fundamental awareness before that knowingness. The knowing consciousness emerges from that. It is the spirit that keeps the potential of consciousness alive when it is inert. It must be present even when people are in profound, peaceful sleep, or there will be no coherence when they wake up, or progress through any phases of consciousness. It is the receptacle, the substratum from which all mindsets emerge. They emerge from the core of the thought process. As a result, all consciousness is this one thing. In the broadest sense, it's what genius or manifestation evolves. It's all the same thing at its most basic level, that is consciousness. One will only ever perceive consciousness. That's all he will ever have. People are informed that their minds generate patterns, phenomena, noises, flavors, sensations, consciousness, ideas, emotions, awareness, and observations. The container consciousness is the underlying thread that runs across all human beings. It's what they're made of in the most basic sense: pristine, calm, and non-moving. Matter and intellect are both derived from the same origin, and this one element is the universal essence that underpins everything. This is all individuals will ever know, because even a persona or identity concept just intervenes. Everything smoothly takes place because of the cause, the ground reality, the primordial essence, the absolute structure, and the presence of the supernatural. It exists as the base consciousness before exclusionary consciousness emerges. It did not exist long before the advent of knowingness. It happened before the rise of I amness, or knowledge of beingness. It exists because it's the abstract foundation stone. It is both the substance and the essence of all of its manifestations. It is the cornerstone of the visible knower, knowing and known. It is ethereal and clean, but it is constantly ready to manifest itself somehow or the other. However, because it cannot last long, such manifestation is fictitious and unreliable. As what arises is unreal, it avoids colliding with the truth, which is omnipresent. Every human activity is based on this fundamental consciousness, devoid of forms, since it is without any preconditioning. However, it is full of limitless potential. It's known in Buddhism as the receptacle, container, or depository consciousness, because it can hold all of the mental incarnations. By virtue of its constant evidence, or validating character, this core consciousness owns all its forms. All forms originate from it, or out of it, or through it, whatever one wants to phrase it. Consciousness, an objective overview. From prehistory to the present day, the genesis and substance of human sensitivity, also termed qualia, have remained unknown. Several contemporary analytic philosophers of mind, most notably Daniel Dennett of Tufts University, consider consciousness to be such an unacceptable act of disrespect to what they feel should be a useless realm of matter and nothingness. They proclaim it to be an abstraction. It means they either dispute the existence of qualia or contend that science will never be able to study them effectively. This paper would be quite brief if the assumption were accurate. All one may have to say is why the individuals residing in the world are so determined that they have sentiments at all. However, if one has physical pain, complex reasoning to convince him that his sufferings are irrational will not make it any less painful. The said person will carry the pain, since he has little regard for this desperate answer to the mind-body conflict. The bulk of academics take consciousness for granted, and try to figure out how it relates to the physical realm defined by science. At the end of the 20th century, scholars chose to abandon intellectual conversations on consciousness that had occupied researchers since the time of Aristotle to look into the physical trail of consciousness. Is there something about a highly active brain region that causes consciousness? People need to get closer to tackling the more intrinsic issues as they delve deeper. People are looking for the neural correlates of consciousness, NCC. These are described as the bare-bones neuronal mechanisms required for a given subjective awareness. For instance, what happens in the human brain to cause it to get a toothache? Is it necessary for some nerve cells to resonate at some mystical frequency? Is it necessary to activate any specific consciousness neurons? Where might these cells be found in the brain? So many questions are there to be answered. It is always logical to have the clarifications in seriatim. Consciousness of mind. Neuronal correlates of consciousness. The qualifier minimum is necessary for defining the NCC. Admittedly, the brain itself can be called an NCC because it triggers experience on a daily basis. On the other hand, the locus of consciousness can be further encircled. One may consider the spinal cord a supple conduit of nervous tissue approximately 1.5 feet long that runs through the backbone and contains around 1 billion mesh nerve cells. Patients whose spinal cord is totally damaged due to neck trauma are paralyzed in their arms, legs, and even chest, unable to regulate their bowel and urine, and are devoid of any physical feeling. Despite this, these people with tetraplegia continue to invade human life in all of their forms. People see, hear, smell, feel emotions, and recollect just as much as they did before the traumatic event. Also, one may consider the cerebellum, which is located beneath the rear of the brain and is known as the smaller brain. It is important in muscle control, posture, movement, and the fluid production of complicated patterns of motor motions. It is one of the most primitive neural pathways in human evolution. The cerebellum is involved in various tasks such as playing any musical instruments, calculating, and doing every possible human activity. Purkinje cells, the most elegant neurons in the brain, have tendrils that spread out like a surfing coral in the sea and contain multiple electrical dynamics. It also possesses 4 times as many neurons as the remaining of the brain combined, with roughly 69 billion star-shaped cerebral granule cells. What transpires to consciousness if a hemorrhage happens, or a surgeon removes sections of the cerebellum? Cerebellar patients experience a variety of deficiencies, such as a reduction of fluidity in computer keyboard typing, although they never lose consciousness. They can hear, smell, see, and feel good, have a sense of identity, recollect past events, and decide their future course. Even the absence of cerebellum during birth has no impact on an individual's subjective awareness. Subjective view is unaffected by the large cerebellar system because its circuitry, which is extremely homogeneous and parallel, contains important insights similar to the attachment of batteries in parallel. The cerebellum is nearly entirely a feed-forward circuit, wherein one group of neurons affects the next, which controls the third set of neurons. No intricate feedback loops are reverberating with back-and-forth electrical impulses. Given the amount of time it takes for a conscious experience to form, several theorists assume it involves feedback loops in the cavernous circuitry of human brains. Furthermore, the cerebellum is separated into hundreds and thousands of distinct computing modules. Each one controls the movements of separate muscular or cognitive functions in tandem, with discrete AL 2010 inputs and outputs. They hardly ever interact with another quality thought to be necessary for the arousal of consciousness. The concept of conscious efforts does not materialize just because any brain tissue is aroused, as the spinal cord and cerebellum do function. This additional component is located in the gray matter that makes up the cerebral cortex, the brain's external layer. It's a 14-inch thick laminated covering of densely interwoven nerve tissue. Two of these layers, folded tightly, are jammed inside the skull, together with their millions of filaments, the white matter. The neocortical tissue is implicated in generating sensations in all existing evidence. Consciousness of mind. Some experimental observations. One can even pinpoint the region of consciousness. Experiments with separate stimuli shown to the left and right eyes can be cited as a reference. Besides, one may assume that he can only see an image of Clint Eastwood with his left eye and a photograph of Michael Jordan using the right eye. Scientists can assume that the subject person witnesses some strange Eastwood-Jordan superimposition. In reality, he will see Eastwood for a split second. Then he'll vanish, and Jordan will emerge. Then again, he will evaporate, and Eastwood will reappear. As described by neuroscientists, binocular rivalry causes the two images to overlap in a never-ending symphony. As the human brain receives complex information, it is hard to determine whether it is Clint Eastwood or Michael Jordan. If someone lies under a magnetic scanner that records brain activity simultaneously, researchers will see that a large number of cortical areas, commonly referred to as the posterior hot segments, are activated. The occipital, parietal, and temporal sections of the posterior part of the cortex are the ones that are the most necessary to track what one can see. Surprisingly, the primary visual cortex, which collects and transmits visual information, does not indicate individual views. Touch and sound appear to have a similar order of performance. However, primary somatosensory and fundamental auditory cortices do not seem to contribute directly to the subject of somo-autosensory or auditory affairs. The next phases of processing, known as the posterior hot area, emerge as a consciousness, which includes the visuals of Eastwood or Jordan. Two clinical types of common evidence are most insightful. These are electrical stimulation of cortical tissue and the observation of patients after damage or disease that results in the loss of certain areas. Neurosurgeons actively map the operations of adjacent cortical tissue by stimulating the production with electrodes before eradicating a brain tumor or the source of a patient's epileptic convulsions. Stimulation of the posterior hot zone can produce a wide range of perceptions and emotions. Geometric forms, facial distortions, an experience of unreality or familiarity, visual or auditory hallucinations, urgency to move a limb are live examples. Stimulating the frontal lobe of the cortex is a different matter altogether. It usually results in no first-hand impact. From the early part of the 20th century, neurological victims are a second information source. To remove malignancies or treat epileptic episodes, surgeons occasionally had to excise broad band of the prefrontal cortex. What's remarkable about these patients is how commonplace they appeared. The patients had a dearth of inhibition of improper emotions or acts, motor impairments, or compulsive repetition of certain actions or words after losing a section of their frontal lobe. Their temperament and IQ were restored after the operation, and they lived for several years after, with little indication that the dramatic reduction of frontal tissue had a substantial impact on their consciousness. In contrast, even small areas of the posterior cortex, where the hot zone is located, can lead to the loss of an entire group of conscious information, such as the ability to recognize faces, or see movement, color, or space. Consequently, it looks like parts of the posterior cortex are responsible for the visuals, sounds, and sensations people encounter in life. Mostly all consciousness experiences, as far as one can determine, originate from there. What is the critical distinction between these posterior locations and the bulk of the prefrontal cortex, which does not directly participate in the subjective content? The point is, people have no idea. Nonetheless, a recent discovery suggests that neuroscientists are nearer to the facts. Consciousness of mind, the consciousness meter. A device that accurately identifies the fluctuation in consciousness in disabled or incapacitated individuals may include an unmet therapeutic need. Patients are often anesthetized during surgery to keep them motionless and their blood pressure steady, and eradicate discomfort and terrible memories. Sadly, this objective is not always fruitful. Hundreds of patients experience some awareness level while under anesthesia every year. Patients who have suffered a serious brain injury due to an accident, disease, or excessive alcoholism may spend years without being able to talk or react to verbal commands. The clinical arts face a significant hurdle in providing that these people have lived a decent life. One may consider an astronaut stranded in space and attentively listening to Mission Control's challenges to communicate with him. His broken radio cannot transmit his voice, and he looks to be cut off from the rest of the world. This is the desperate position of sufferers whose damaged brains prevent them from communicating with the outside world, a type of preventive detention at its most extreme. In the early part of 2000, Julio Tononi of the Wisconsin-Madison University and Marcello Massimini, currently engaged at the University of Milan, introduced the zap and zip approach to determine if someone is conscious or not. The researchers zapped the human's scalp with an encased coil of wire, sending a powerful surge of magnetic force into the skull and triggering a short electric current in the neurons beneath. In return, the perturbation stimulated and repressed the neurons' partner cells in related locations, causing a chain reaction that reverberated throughout the cortex until the activity faded out. These electrical signals were captured by an array of electroencephalogram sensors placed outside the human skull. These signals, each relating to a distinct spot in the brain beneath the skull, formed a movie as they unfurled over time. Neither a stereotypical pattern nor total randomness could be found in these unfolding data. Surprisingly, the brain was more likely to be unaware of the more consistent waxing and waning patterns. The scientists in this field validated their assumption by compressing the movie's contents using a compression process similar to that used to zip computer records. The zipping produced an approximation of the brain's reaction to the intricacy. The perturbational complexity index of consciousness volunteers ranged between 0.31 and 0.70, declining below 0.31 while in deeply sleeping or sedated condition. Massimini and Tonano put this zap and zip technique to the test on at least 48 neurologically ill patients, yet responsive and conscious. They found that it supported the behavioral proof of consciousness on every occasion. The researchers then used zap and zip on as many as 81 individuals who were either badly aware or vegetative. The approach accurately identified 36 out of 38 patients as conscious in the first group, which showed evidence of non-reflexive behavior. 2 patients were mistaken as unconscious. 34 of the 43 vegetative patients, for whom all attempts at contact at the bedside failed, were categorized as unconscious, while 9 were exceptions. Their brains reacted similarly to conscious controls, suggesting that they were awake but unable to converse with their family members. Current research is aimed at specifically standardizing and improving zap and zip for neurological patients, as well as expanding it to psychiatric and pediatric patients. Experts will eventually determine the distinguished neurological tracts that offer assent to any given experience. Although these discoveries will have significant clinical ramifications and may provide comfort to relatives and friends, they will not significantly provide answers to some basic issues, such as why these neurons are to be considered and not others, why this frequency rather than another one. Indeed, how and why any highly structured bit of active substance gives rise to conscious perception remains a dilemma. After all, like any other organ, the brain is governed by the same physical principles that apply to the heart and liver. What makes it unique? What is it about the biophysics of a clump of extremely hyperactive brain matter that transforms gray mush into the magnificent surrounding sound and technicolor of daily lives? Eventually, people require a scientific explanation of consciousness that describes the conditions under which any framework, whether a complicated circuit of neurons or silicon transistors, has sensations. Why is it that the intensity of these interactions varies so much? Why is the screeching of a poorly tuned violin sound distinct from a pure blue sky? Is there a purpose to these feeling variances? And if so, what are they? Probably all individuals can predict which systems will encounter what if they have such a hypothesis in question. In the absence of a framework with testable predictions, any assumption about machine consciousness is dependent only on human intuition, which history has shown that it is not a useful predictor. The two most prominent theories of consciousness have sparked heated discussions. The Global Neural Workspace, GNW, developed by Bernard J. Bears, psychologist, and Stanislas Dehaene and Jean-Pierre Changeux, neuroscientists, is one such example. The approach starts with the fact that it is accessible to several distinct sections of their brain when people are aware of something. The information is localized to the sensory motor structure in question if they act unconsciously. When one types quickly, for instance, he does so instinctively. People have very little conscious access to that information, which is also localized to the brain circuits connecting their eyes to swift finger movements if they are asked how to do it. The Consciousness Fundamentals. GNW, Global Neuronal Workspace, claims that consciousness results from a specific field of information synthesis, similar to what was used in the initial periods of artificial intelligence, when specialized programs would trespass a limited, shared database. Whatever was written on this blackboard became accessible to a slew of other processes, including language, working memory, and the strategic model. As per GNW, awareness arises when raw sensory input, scribbled on such a blackboard, is transmitted globally to many neural abilities, which process the data to communicate, store or recall a memory, or carry out an event. Humans can only be made aware of a small amount of data at a particular time due to the blackboard's restricted space. The frontal and parietal lobes are thought to house the mesh of neurons that transmit these messages. Once these meager facts are disseminated on this specific network, the information becomes clear and easily scalable. The subject, in other words, becomes conscious of it. While contemporary machines lack this degree of cognitive capability, it is just a matter of time before they succeed. According to GNW, future computers will be highly conscious. Tononi and his associates devised the Integrated Information Theory, IIT, which states from a different place and experience. Each experience has a unique set of characteristics. It is inherent, structured, and specific, unlike any other subjective awareness, such as a certain frame in a celluloid screen. It is also consistent and definite. The varied aspects of the experience, the gust of wind in one hair, or the thrill of hearing the kids playing in the nearby park, cannot be split into fragments in the absence of the experience that fails to be what it is when one strolls on a pathway on a warm, bright day, watching kids engaged in playing. Any sophisticated and integrated mechanism whose architecture encrypts a sequence of cause and effect interactions will have these features, and thus some degree of consciousness crops up. It will feel as if it is coming from within. However, if the mechanism, like the cerebellum, is without integration and sophistication, it will be oblivious of anything. Consciousness, according to IIT, is an inherent causal capacity linked with complex processes like the human brain. IIT paradigm also provides a single non-negative number, called phi, that measures consciousness from the intricacy of the fundamental interrelated structure. If the phi is 0, the program does not appear to be anything other than itself. Conversely, the higher this number, the greater the program's inherent causal power, and the more conscious it will be. The brain has a very elevated and extremely high degree of consciousness, with its vast and highly precise connection. IIT explains various findings, including why the cerebellum has no role in consciousness, and how the zap-zip meter works. The quantity measured by the meter is a very rough estimate of the pi. IIT also predicts that even a complex replica of a human brain operating on a digital computer can talk indistinguishably from a human being. In this case, it will not be conscious. Scripting for consciousness will never generate a conscious machine, just as stimulating the immense gravitational pull of a black hole does not necessarily change space-time around the computer performing the astrophysics code. Consciousness cannot be measured. It must be incorporated into the system's intrinsic structure. There are two obstacles to overcome. One approach is to use the incredibly advanced instruments at people's disposal to see and examine the huge consortia of extremely varied neurons that make up the brain. It is necessary to understand the neural imprints of consciousness better. This attempt will take decades to accomplish the central nervous system's intricacy. The other solution is to test or refute the two most widely held assumptions. Else, possibly, to piece together a better theory from these two traits that will explain the primary mystery of human life, how a 3-pound system with the solidarity of a computer emits the sensation of life. The conscious and subconscious mindset. The combination of the subconscious and the conscious mind is the state of consciousness in which understanding of its utilization is employed to attain higher levels of consciousness and progress of mental awareness concerning personal growth and self-awareness. The phrases consciousness and subconsciousness have been coined to describe components of the brain and learning related to the human perception that is accentuated to live fruitfully. To illustrate, the subconscious thinks in terms of images and symbols to communicate ideas. The subconscious contains expressions such as analytical thought, innovative ideas, convictions, and abstract patterns of the human thought process. It also stores memories of human life experiences and hereditary designs of behavior in the context of individual conditioning and upbringing. Though the subconscious contains the key to better mental awareness in terms of ideas and emotions, the substance and relevant information inside them is useless until it is communicated consciously and with specific awareness for any cause. Subconscious utterances that make it to the conscious mind are sifted by logic and reasoning, making them more realistic and understandable in their articulation. Otherwise, nothing people do, speak, or communicate to or about would sound right or have any purpose. The conscious experience, on the other hand, is what lends expression to the human awakening and consciousness. The sensory perceptions provide information from the external world, which is subsequently processed and digested by the cognitive thought processes and emotions. They are then transmitted to the subconscious, where they are reshaped into convictions, aspirations, and values. The conscious mind subsequently taps these attributes in the influence of experiences, shaping how people perceive their lives. The subconscious stores all of the data relevant to human life experiences in the memory reservoir. The conscious mind also plays a pivotal role in the reinterpretation of some subconscious components, including the connotation of symbols. It interprets from across its own conscious thought, or, to put it another way, from outside of one's moment of self-recognition. When it comes to understanding higher consciousness, it enlists the help of the mind's higher intelligence circuits, such as the intuition, soul, and spiritual elements of cognition, whose beginnings can be found in the varying strengths of the mind's subconscious distinction patterns. The major parts of the mind used to achieve higher strata of consciousness are the subconscious conscious mindset and self-awareness. They also collaborate to characterize the entire quality, life, human objectives, and individual awareness as main components of collective consciousness. They infer the mental aspects of human nature and the concept of what life means, as well as who and what people are, and their bondage of being a part of the global source of life. The consciousness and higher awareness. Higher levels of consciousness are those that correspond to the mind's intellect and manifestations concerning the individual soul and spiritual awareness. In a broader sense, stages of individual greater consciousness are linked to divine and universal states of self-recognition, which combine to produce cosmic channels of subconscious conscious activities. It is where the planes of the individual flow of consciousness are simply apart. First, it is vital to consider that everything generated is primarily composed of electromagnetism and matter particles of varied densities. It encompasses ideas, feelings, and any level of consciousness, no matter what it is. If employed correctly and in tandem with subconscious mind awareness and deeper conscious aware phases, the mind of the reason may be brought to anything and made to make use of it. When an individual is conscious and aware of something actually occurring in his subconscious, it is conceivable to see not only how the subconscious correlations of their behavior function, but also how they collaborate from a situation of mental disassociation, wherein self-awareness has been enhanced to a higher trance of consciousness affirmation, which provides sufficient evidence for the support of those higher states. When the primary objective of a technique for attaining greater mind visibility includes a conscious perception of the exercises of the subconscious influences, the mind summons higher awareness resources and energy, such as those that are sanctified and strengthened through the use of the authority of both determination and intelligence that stem from supreme perceptions of the intellectual ability of mind for enough clarity. While in those states, conscious decisions are being made concerning a person's course in life. The sole objective and its significance is viewed through the consciousness and deeper expression, and its subsequent subconscious manifestation. The usual waking consciousness of routine knowledge of mind may go unrecognized by these subtle and essential elements. Since these are regions of awareness created by the higher consciousness and not necessarily accepted by the normal awakenings of the conscious mind, they still arise in the context of higher supervision, postulated in the person's aura by way of electromagnetic states of clever consciousness to which the higher provinces of mental awareness are developed and cultivated. These regions of elevated mind awareness may be completely unconscious to some, subconscious to others, and conscious to everyone else. These jurisdictions of higher mind consciousness may be self-awareness of the subconscious, whose thresholds are of intensity and propensity of resonance, where the scope of awareness is of a deeper context or quality of awareness, but is still regarded consciously. However, it is evidenced only by the human mind and its sensory information. The distinction is that they are simply referred to as subconscious because they are what is veiled from the conscious mind and the visible physical existence. Furthermore, unless a person already has an excellent workplace awareness of how metaphysical precepts work, conscious choices made when advanced tiers of consciousness may not be fully recognized or completely understood at a later point, when simply in a conscious waking condition. Also, self-awareness isn't particularly focused on any subconscious activity relating to higher levels of mind at the time. When this is the case, any experiences had while in a relatively higher state of consciousness are frequently relegated to the mind's recognition as an unconscious aspect of the subconscious, at least until the soul has built a tunnel of consciousness and it is ready to be recognized by it as a conscious developmental period related to its experiences in the sphere of physical, personal, and psychological matter. As a result, while the eventual ground state may appear to give pretense to a customary reality or provisional presence, this transitory existence is really an illusion, devoid of substance and genuine actuality. Consciousness is a complex issue with a lot of unanswered questions. Quantum physics, neuroscientists, philosophers are among the coterie of few who have fully grasped and explained the dynamics and architecture of consciousness and how it can ultimately benefit humans. People appreciate the process of simplifying while attempting to learn something new, aside from understanding a few key things and how executing on this understanding may benefit them. When it comes to identifying topics that are outside of their comfort zone, they try to choose the path of least obstruction. While delivering this essence, the same logic and judgment should be used. Being conscious entails much more than simply being awake. It's more than just being mindful. Consciousness is like peering through a lens to see life's realities. When people are at a higher level of consciousness, they can see the world through new, pristine lenses. Previous experiences or assumptions do not skew the human perspective. As a result, the state of consciousness individuals vibrate at determines human ideas, emotions, values, and subsequent actions. When individuals become conscious, they begin to notice their thought processes, passions, existence, experiences, and overall surroundings. One may start to develop a more realistic perception as his consciousness grows. It enables individuals to live a life that is truly affluent, lively, and overflowing with joy, substance, pleasure, and purpose. It is an effective means for living a life full of health, enthusiasm, and vigor. A prosperous life is led by a healthy lifestyle. A person's conscious baseline is the frequency at which they vibrate. There is usually a shift toward a handful of steps above or below that level, depending on the circumstances. The stimulation in people's life affects their consciousness. It will include the scenarios people are in, the social interactions, and the atmosphere. Human consciousness is subject to change, and whatever vibration people are currently at will alter in the future. Engaging with individuals who resonate at greater levels of consciousness than remaining others, but are in closer proximity, has a profound influence on their own consciousness. Individuals have an impact on mankind and humanity when they enhance their level of consciousness. One should keep in mind that all humans are interconnected subconsciously. The following is a scale of a single human being or a group's effect when consciousness is elevated. 70 million people below level 200 are counterbalanced by one person at level 700. 10 million people below level 200 are countered by one person at level 600. 750,000 people below level 200 are offset by one person at level 500. 400,000 people below level 200 are compensated by one person at level 400. 90,000 people below level 200 are partially offset by one person at level 300. 12 people with a level of 700 are equal to one individual with a level of 1,000. Approximately 15% of the world's population exceeds the essential threshold of 200. That 15% of the populace has enough clout to counteract the negativity of the rest 85% of the world's population. Without these counterbalances, humanity would become extinct due to overwhelming negativity. One can understand why everyday personal development is so crucial for both an individual and the rest of humanity.